Okay, for those of you that are here, okay. How did I do this last time? Oh. If someone's watching live, could they just type in a comment to see if you can hear me? I like that people are adding in already. This. Oh, hold on, let me see if that, all right, perfect, okay. So everyone can hear me. This is not gonna be the setup, there were some technical issues. Eventually what's gonna happen is I'll use a software and you will see the screen over here and then let me do it this way, my face will be down here. So that's gonna be the OBS. The other thing is they did put me in a very large auditorium. So if you want to be on campus, if you feel like a live experience, and I'm not gonna lie, I am not very good with technology. It took me an entire semester to figure it out, and now it's not working again. So one of the things that to be prepared for is that eventually there'll be an OBS studio. I'll have everything up. I'll be able to see your comments, and you'll be able to see my face, and you'll be able to see the slides. And there aren't any slides today. So for now, what I'd like you to do is go into Web Campus. That's where you got the link, that's where you got the email. And I'd like you to open the syllabus. And I'm gonna do an introduction now. And then I'm gonna open up a syllabus quiz later today. I want you to take the syllabus quiz. What I'm gonna have to do, because I'm gonna let you do remotely, is that every class session, you're gonna have an assignment. And your assignment's gonna be attendance. That's gonna be your, the aspect that you have to follow, right? So if you don't do an assignment that week, you didn't attend that week. So that's how I'm gonna do attendance. And the only reason I don't do an attendance grade, the only reason I even care is when someone does very poorly. And look, I understand that, right? Sometimes people just don't, or they underperform in a semester. I have to say the last time you attended, if I were to fail someone. So one, you don't have to worry about it, right? If you're getting a passing grade, attendance doesn't matter in this class because I don't want to push you to be here. I think that's very ableist and problematic to say you need to be here when under these conditions. But I need some way to track attendance, right? That was some feedback I got last time. All right, so we have some people in here. I think when I go live on a webcam, it doesn't like record, so I'm hoping it's recording. The other part is I am waiting a little bit for more people to get in. I think there's a few more. If you miss anything, the great part about when I use OBS Studio and YouTube is it records it, right? So if you miss a lecture, you can go and to my political science channel. And this is not a YouTube thing. I am not a YouTuber. That's not the interest. I just wanted the easiest way. There's no accessibility. Sometimes Web Campus doesn't work or the web chat is a problem. All of you can use YouTube. Guaranteed all of you can use YouTube. There's no login. If you want to make anonymous comments, you can use a different user to where you don't have to use your name and use it. So I like that because if you have a question and you don't feel comfortable asking it, but if you could feel comfortable asking it anonymously, then that's the thing. The only problem with that is eventually I will have to make the channel private because last semester I had a few people who sort of jumped in and made harassing comments, right? So eventually it'll be private, but I will send you the link so you won't have to worry about that. That won't be an issue. And eventually you'll see both of them. Today, because I'm not gonna go over much material, it's gonna be fine. You're just gonna sort of see the syllabus and then we're gonna go from there. That is gonna put us a little behind, but next week, right, we're gonna jump into what is comparative politics, right? That's gonna be the discussion next week. Now I'm gonna talk about a few things today because it is a 3-hour class. Now I'm not gonna keep you for 3 hours. We're gonna do, I think, an hour and an hour with a 15-minute break. I think we do an hour that's 9:45, and then a 15-minute break puts us to 10, and then another hour puts us to 11, right? That's still 10 minutes shy of what I'm supposed to do, but considering these conditions, and trust me, trying to talk through this mask is very dehydrating. So 2 hours in one day is gonna be a lot for me. I'm not a young man anymore, so I'm gonna try and communicate as clearly as possible, and some days we're gonna run a little long, some days really short. We have a lot of material, and because it's a Friday class, this is not a good class in the best conditions, right? This is a 3-hour, 1-day-a-week class, right? Which means I have to compress 2 classes into one, which makes it harder for you to get through the material. So that all being said, right, I'm gonna record the lectures if you feel like you need to go back, right? That's part of the aspect. Okay, so I think I have 15, we're still a little short, but I'm gonna communicate one-on-one. I have office hours, but they're virtual for now, right? So if you need to talk to me, just email me, and normally I have office hours after this, but we can chat whenever. And during that, right, we can Skype, WebEx, whatever you have, I will adapt to that so we can communicate virtually. Now, as we move forward, right, if the vaccination schedule gets better, right, then we'll start doing one-on-one meetings in my office. But for now, I'm available, and that means that I can be available by appointment. So if you say, hey, I can't meet you right after class because I have 2 Friday classes because you're a glutton for punishment, right, and you took the 8:30 and the 11:30 Friday classes because maybe that's the only day you could get, right? If you can't come to those office hours, we'll set up some sort of meeting. So that's the thing is, I don't want any of you falling through the cracks, right? This is the time when people would fall through the cracks. So I'm available all the time. This is the only class I teach. So you are my only students, right? Whatever time you need, I will function with that. Okay, so we're still missing a lot of people. I'm gonna go over this. I'm gonna post another video later. If you wanna be in the classroom, be in the classroom. Right, that's the biggest thing, right? If you want to be here, you pay to be here. You're paying fees for the university. If you want to be in person, that's perfectly acceptable. If you don't ever want to be here, that's also acceptable. Okay. Now, if any of you have questions in the chat, I can see the chat. I'm going to come back and forth to it. So feel free to ask questions whenever they come up. All right, so let's get into the syllabus. So I'm going to switch over. I'll come back and forth a little bit. Maybe I can do, look at that. Okay, that'll work. So now I can see both. And I know those of you watching can only see me, but bring up the, sort of minimize screen, sort of work with this. So we're talking about the syllabus. The first thing is my name is Kevin Worthy. I have a master's degree in political science from California State University of Sacramento. I specialize in IR and comparative politics. I actually specialize in IR mostly. The good part about that is that this is part of my specialty. I understand this. The bad part is we won't be discussing any of the things that happened in the last sort of 10 months, right? I am not a historian, right? So I can't speak about what happened in the last few weeks or the election or things that happened before the election. And I'm also not a political philosopher, right? So I have no training in moral theory. So when we have a discussion, one of the biggest things that I want you to know is I am never taking a moral stance, ever. That is not the way that I teach political science, right? And for me, political science is as much a science as it can possibly be, right? We are aspiring to be scientists. So I will never make a moral argument. I will never say right, wrong, indifferent, and what we call normative statements, right? I will never say I like, I don't like. That's not going to be part of my lecture. My lecture should give you as much information as possible to give you the best answers that you can for my exams. And when you're done with my class, be able to critically assess things like different cultures, different governments, right? Different systems, different rules of law, so that you can differentiate between those two scientifically to the best of your ability, right? Now, because of that, we're going to miss some things, right? There are some cultural explanations that we're not going to really discuss. Now, I would argue that that's for an anthropologist, right? That's not really for this course. When we talk about sort of Japanese culture versus Korean culture versus Chinese culture, right? Those are things that could happen in this class. We're going to skip over that because that's not my specialty, right? That's just one of those things that we're not going to talk about. So I know that some of you, you're not political scientists. This isn't your major, right? So you took this as sort of an international requirement. You're thinking, oh, comparative politics, you're comparing cultures, religions, things like that. I'm only going to be talking about the governmental aspects, right? How do they function as a government? How do they come to this case, right? How do they work that way? So that's what we're going to talk about in political science. So first thing we need to understand when we're talking about this is what are sort of basic definitions. We're going to start with that in the first couple of weeks, but I'll come back to that. I have a tendency to get sidetracked. I will rein it in as much as possible. So let's go to the syllabus. The first thing that I think is the most important is there are no required materials. I hate textbooks, right? Textbooks are expensive. A new edition comes out every 2 years. It's like $100. It doesn't make sense. I didn't buy a lot of my textbooks when I was in. It doesn't benefit me. I don't have any profit participation, right? Dr. Bowers writes the Sagebrush State book, which is the required Nevada book, right? He has profit participation. It makes sense for him, right, to want to include that book. And for a 101, we should require textbooks because that's basically getting you in the door. I'm going to expect you as sort of 200 level students, right, sort of sophomores as the sort of expectation of the course, that you can go to the library, right, the library website, right, which you can just type in library.unlv.edu and you'll get there. And you can just search for these articles and these book chapters that I'm going to ask you to look up. And they're all listed in the syllabus. So that's the first thing is whenever I say you need to do a reading, it's going to be in the library website. Go to the library website, learn how to use it. The best part about that is I only use books and peer-reviewed sources. So you're going to learn how we sort of pull in sources, how we work with that. And also, university libraries have really made my life much better, right? They have access to things that other places don't, and the university pays for it for you, right? So I want you to be able to use that. So when you're going through, if you're like, I couldn't find this, right? Email me, maybe there's a problem, and then I'll find some other way. But I checked all the sources. I looked all of the sources up through the library's website. Right? That's how I got them all their citations, right? So you should be able to get that. So no text, right? You should pull them in. The other part is as we go through this course, I never give you anything where you can't use your notes or the readings, right? You always have access to notes and readings. It doesn't make sense to me to have a closed book exam for comparative politics. You should always be able to find the answers. Now, here's the thing. Because of that, essentially all of my exams are take-home, right? Take-home is sort of a lost term because everything is take-home now, right? But the biggest part is that I'm never going to give you like 60 minutes in this course, right? If you learn my 101 or maybe other parts, right? There might be a time limit. I want you to take the question, I want you to know the terminology, and I want you to develop an answer. So for some of you, that's going to be much harder, because what I'm asking you to do is not just know the information, but understand the information and interpret it in such a way that you can provide an answer. Because I don't really need you to memorize things about certain countries, right? I was a Korean linguist in the Army, right? I know that Koreans have a great disdain for the Japanese because the Japanese at one time occupied Korea and a whole host of other things, right? I know that, but that doesn't help me in any of my other work, right? It doesn't help me. That memory doesn't help. So I don't need you to memorize. I need you to understand, right? And since most of you are not political science majors, the point of that is that you learn to do good analysis and understand to approach things from a sort of an epistemology of what is actually happening and what can we glean from that information we're observing, right? So that critical analysis is way more important than memorization of facts. Now, that being said, there are some terminology we have to break. We have to learn democracy. What does democracy mean? How do we define it? So we can speak the same language, but otherwise that is one of the aspects. Okay, so let's get into the course requirements. There are going to be 6 quizzes. When I say quizzes, I think people get mistaken. I have to list them as quizzes because that's the way the web campus works. That's the way Canvas works. But you can take them as many times as you want, and I only keep the highest score. So I want you to get a perfect score on these. I'm going to ask you a bunch of questions. Some of them might be very difficult, but you can sort of technically use process of elimination to keep taking it so you get a perfect score. But the point is that if you've done the reading, you should be able to answer the questions. And if you can't, think about why you can't answer those questions. And maybe ask me, this isn't clear from the readings, how did you get to this answer? And then we'll have that discussion. So we're going to do 6 quizzes. They are 5% of your grade each, which makes that 30% of your grade. So you have a syllabus quiz that's due before the next session, and then a quiz after that. That's going to be your attendance. That's going to be that part. I want you to get a perfect score. So if you're like, I don't know why I got this answer, or this doesn't seem right, email me and we'll talk about it. So that's the first part. The second part is our 3 exams. I'm going to have some short answer, some essay, some multiple choice, but mostly essay. What I want you to do is from the readings we have covered before that exam, I want you to pick up examples, specifics, arguments from those readings. And then when I ask you a question, I want you to pull from those readings to explain your answer. So the good part about this is that you can sort of interpret this the way that you want, right? We're going to talk about quantitative versus qualitative in a minute. One of the things about that is when we talk about quantitative, it's like by numbers, right? Statistics, counting, right? A qualitative analysis would be like 400,000 people died from COVID, right? That's a real countable quantitative analysis, right? If we were going to judge how well the US government did and handling COVID, that would be the number we would refer to. That's quantitative. The other part is qualitative. And qualitative is more common in comparative politics. When we're talking about qualitative, we're talking about how well, we're talking about observation, different types of understanding, and different types of perception. And that's one of the things that we're going to talk about is, are we talking about an objective reality where we're counting things, or perception, the way we perceive individuals, right? Because if we talk about perception, then we have a different way that we have to measure things, right? Our perception of leaders is dramatically different, right? We are very polarized as a country. So our perception of our leaders is very, very different based on our perception. And those are both valid ways to look at the world: an objective perception, an objective reality, and a perceived reality. And they require different metrics for understanding. So we're going to get into that next week. I was going to talk about it more, but because you can't see both screens, I don't want to benefit one, like the live versus the online remote viewing, differently. So when we're looking at an exam, make sure you understand I'm going to answer this question and I'm going to explain it to the best of my ability using the sources that we've covered, and only the sources we've covered, right? That's the biggest part. Use what I've given you in the classroom, because that's the most testable material I can give you. Right? Even if you have a better answer. This is sometimes my A students get this problem. They're like, I've read all this other stuff and I'm going to use that one. Well, I'm testing you on the material I gave you. Just try and stick to that as much as you can. Okay, so those are 10% each. They're take home. Essentially what will happen is they'll open and you'll have sort of unlimited time, but they'll open for like 4 or 5 days. Like the end of one class, they'll open, and then before we start the next class, they'll close. And I grade them pretty fast, usually 24 to 40 hours after the window closes. So you should get your answers right away. I will explain to you why you didn't get a perfect score if you don't get a perfect score. So I'm very fair. A lot of professors have this thing like there's no such thing as a perfect score. There's always a way to improve. The standard is at one level. And I'm going to switch to this so I can see my hands. So this is the standard for a perfect score, right? If you wanted a 10 out of 10 on an essay response. This is a perfect response, an actual perfect response. You're 200 level students, sophomores, right? So your expectation is here, right? If I were to write something, well, not here, but here, right? So the expectation for me is higher. So I might give you a very critical analysis. I might say there's a whole host of things wrong with your response and still give you a 10 out of 10 because you've met the standard of the course. But of course your answer isn't perfect, you're undergrads, right? So I'm gonna give you, here's where you need to be in the future, here's the critique of where you need in the future, and here's your score. And I think that's understandable, right? I'm not gonna say, oh, you didn't get a perfect score, so I'm not gonna give you 10 out of 10. There has to be a way to get a 10 out of 10 in the answer. And their standard is gonna be very clear. I'm gonna write a clear rubric where I explain to you what you need to do to get a good score. So that's the exams. The next thing is a paper. The paper, I'll give you a prompt. I want you to pick a topic, and I think I'm going to list the topics just to make it easier for me. I have found this very useful for students, where I say choose a side. And without normative answers, without saying you like something or something is right or wrong, choose a side and make an argument, an empirical argument based on the evidence of why your argument is better than other arguments, right? And in my 101s, I use marijuana legalization, right? And the arguments they have to make, is it better for it to be legal or should it be criminalized? Should it be, right, prohibited, right? And they make an argument. And the important part about this is both sides can be right. Both sides can be right, right? Marijuana legalization brings in tax funds, right? And it decriminalizes, so you don't have too many people in prison, and it saves money, right? Economically, right, it can be better. But also, right, police officers have argued, right, that means there's going to be more traffic accidents. And that might offset the economic benefits, which means that private interests are going to be better, but the sort of government is going to be worse off because it has to budget for that, right? Just so you know, drunk driving accidents are incredibly expensive for the county, right? It's very, very expensive. Property damage, loss of life, right? And usually the drunk driver doesn't have the funds to sort of recoup that, which means it falls on the county, the city, the state to cover those costs, right? So both arguments can be valid. And I honestly don't care about, I was in the Army, I have no idea, right? I haven't used any drugs whatsoever in this century. So when we talk about this, the point is not whether I care about it, that's not the interest. It's that you can make a valid argument on either side, and I don't really care which side you take, I care about the evidence you present, right? So when you're writing your paper, it needs to be empirical and it needs to choose a side. And I'm going to pick a few things. One of them I really love is democracy good, right? And I know good is normative, right? But is democracy best for the people that are involved? And some of you might say no, right? It's a very valid argument. Professors have said this a lot, right? That democracy is bad, right? Because people don't know what they're doing, they're not informed, right? And there's a lot of literature that's going to go back and forth in this. So you might be sort of anti-pure democracy, right? In that sense, right? And say, okay, people need to be informed, or you need representative leaders, right? You can make either argument, or, right, anything other than democracy is tyranny, right? You can make both arguments, right? So I want that to be available to you. So when you're writing your paper, we're going to talk about that a lot in the next coming weeks about how to go through that. And that's 20% of your grade. The last, not the last part, but the participation is going to work very differently because I don't expect you to be in the classroom. I want you guys to come if you feel like you should, but also, right, be as careful as you can. It's not worth any of you getting sick. So, make those determinations. Because I have to allow online participation, I think I'm going to use a very old and something that I don't love, where you're going to have discussion, right? I'm going to open a discussion thread over the next, and you have to contribute 5 times over the semester. I don't think 5 times over a semester is really tough. But I think when I talk about participation, I mean something very different, right? If you say, oh, I really like that, or I agree with you when someone's made a statement, that's not participation, right? I need substantive participation. You can ask a question coming into the week's readings, like, I didn't understand this part, can you explain it? And then I will answer it. That counts as participation, right? You can say, I read this reading and I pulled this from it, I think this is what I got, or I think this is wrong because of a previous reading. That's substantive, right? Evidence-based communication is going to be every part of this course. Oh, and because of university guidelines, don't call me professor worthy, call me instructor worthy. I'm not a professor. I don't have a tenure track job, so they are very clear about that. Also, don't call me Dr. Worthy. I don't have a doctorate yet. I have not earned that title. Instructor Worthy is fine. Mr. Worthy is fine. I don't really care about titles. Just let's not violate policies. Let's not violate more guidelines, university guidelines, than we already violate, right? So there's that. The last part is a final exam. I really want to do a final exam that's take home, that's sort of long and you have to get involved in, but I also know that the end of your semester is really difficult. So I'm gonna hold off on giving you like really clear statements about the final, because if we are in a better place, I would love it to be in this classroom. I would love the final to be in this classroom. And I don't mean that to make it harder, but I have found that as much as I could test you and give you another take home and give you a final take home, I would love for you to be collaborative, as much as group projects are very, right? I would love for you to be in this room, collaborative, sort of working on understanding in a way that we really missed. And if we miss that the whole semester because you're not in a classroom communicating, I would love for the final to be that. So we'll see how we are in May if the vaccination rollout gets better, right? So right now the final is just another take home that's a little heavier and covers the entire course. But I don't love that. I don't love that having that at the end, because I know you have other courses at the end, and I like to front load my classes, so more work in the beginning, so sort of lighten your load as you go into your other courses at the end of those courses. So just trying to find the balance between those two things. I might review the final. So here's a breakdown of the grades, right? The part that I want you to notice is that the total is 100. That's not a mistake, right? The total of this course is out of 100. Now, when I add extra credit, you might be able to get more than 100. It is possible to get more than 100% in my course. No one ever has, because right, apparently some of my exams are a little difficult. Not so difficult that frightening, but right, if you get a perfect score on everything, it's possible to have 100%. But very few people do that, and typically at the end of the semester, they don't need as much work, so they sort of slow down. The grade breakdown is very clear. I always round up. I usually add a little bit of a curve. So if you're like right on the cusp and you're like, hey, can I do extra credit? Usually the answer is no. But usually if you're like, I'm at 89.6 and I really want to get an A minus, I'm usually going to say no because I'm already going to give you an A minus. So usually I say no to extra credit only because you think you're like right at the edge of a grade and I think you're already past that line, right? So when I say no, usually I've already sort of taken that into account. All right, I don't accept any late work. I give you a really long window, right? I'm going to give you 4 or 5 days for the take-home window, maybe even the whole week, just because I won't have it graded, may not have it graded. I have to decide if I want it graded when you come back the next session. But you're going to have days to open and do the exam. So if you say, oh, I couldn't get to it, well, I gave you 5 days. So how could you not in 5 days, right, get to the exam? You have to have a very, very good excuse for that to happen. The quizzes don't actually have a deadline, so you can come back to them. I like that you can come back to them and like redo them as a refresher, sort of a study mechanism. And I'm going to pull like 10 questions that sort of randomize. So you can take it and slightly different each time. So those are never closed, and I always keep the highest score. So the best part about that is, right, you can always go back and you can get those points. So 30% of your grade, you can always get better at and sort of maximize that aspect. The paper I never accept late, only because it takes a lot of my time. It's about 4 to 5 pages. It takes me about 20 to 30 minutes per paper, and I think there's almost 40 of you. That's like 20 hours of work. It's just once I've graded the papers, I don't have any allotted time to set up. Now, obviously, there are exceptions, right? And health conditions can sort of set up. All right, so let's look at the course calendar. I'm not going to go over the rules like classroom rules. You're adults. I don't like children. I'm sure I can get crucified for this later because all this is recorded, but I've said it so many times in my life, no one will be surprised. I don't like children, right? I don't deal with children. I don't have children. I will not treat you like children. So if there's a rule that you're breaking, I will tell you you're breaking the rule. And then you will stop doing that. And if you don't, you will leave the classroom or I will sort of censor, right? Whatever needs to happen. But I'm going to treat you like adults, right? And I would ask that you continue that process. Now, because of this, right, you guys don't communicate, you don't talk, right? The only thing that I will say is I have only had to intervene like 3 times, and every single time it's been a male harassing a female. Don't put me in that position, right? I was in the military. Harassment is not acceptable in any case, and I will definitely report you every single time, right? I don't have time for that, right? And so it's happened a few times. I've always reported it. University does whatever the university is going to do, right? But every other time, anything that's been inappropriate, it's been very minor, and the person has stopped immediately, right? If your phone goes off, right? If you are in the classroom, your phone goes off, just turn your phone off, right? Right? We can all be adults, and don't eat. I mean, if you need to, but obviously just eating and drinking in the classroom now is a nightmare. So just avoid that as best you can. But, right, if you need to be here and you want some water, I know you got masks on, it's dehydrating. Just be discreet and, right, keep your mask on while you're here. All right. So I'm going to take a little bit of your time and let you go. I think it's been like a half hour. I want to get this sort of set up. So if we're looking at the syllabus, okay, I don't need any of that. So if you're looking at the syllabus, look at the top part. This will tell you what to do, right? So if you look quiz 1, although it's not ready, it's going to be up tonight. I want you to have it done. Quiz 2 is actually going to be due the same day that quiz 1 is. So I want you to do these readings beforehand. I want you to take the quiz before I lecture you on, right? I want you to get a head start on this. Now, because they're not open, right, you can sort of press back and go through it. The readings are listed. I would like you to read them in order because we're going to do the classes in order. I cut this down a lot. There's about half as much reading as the last time I taught this. It just was too much. I don't really know how to hit the mark on a 200 level course, right? What's the actual scale, right? I know that like 101 is like really easy because people are just coming in, and 400 is right when you graduate, but trying to find that 200 level. So it might be too hard, too easy. We'll just have to find the difficulty level as we go through. So I cut down on the readings, which means we'll do more analysis on those specific readings. We're going to start with just an introduction. So I want you to know what comparative politics is, and we're going to have a long discussion about that. Normally today, I would do a discussion about what science is. So we're going to add that. So we're going to be a little behind because I want to add that in. Just the technology is not really set up the way that I would like. And if you can't see the screen, for those of you that are here, that's better. But because most of you are going to be online, I need you to see what I'm doing so I can explain, right? So really quick, just as a bit of sort of like not homework, but sort of prep. If you don't know what ontology is, epistemology, and methodology, I would suggest you sort of look up their meanings, right? Because we're going to talk a lot about ontology, right? Ontology is how you build the world, right? And specifically, we're going to talk about this objective reality versus perception, right? There are two arguments, right? And this is actually coming from political philosophy, but we have an objective reality, right? Some of you would argue perfectly, right? You can touch the table, you can count things, right? That's objective, right? That's not the only version of science that's acceptable. There's also this, right, this perception and intersubjective, right? The subjective and the intersubjective. And these are different ways to build the world, right? That you could say, right, some things are countable, but the way we perceive our leaders, the way we understand our government, that can be perception-based, that can be subjective or intersubjective, right? Why do we say this is a classroom? It's not different in its construction than other rooms, right? Or why is a specific room a dining room? That's subjective, right? It's intersubjective, and that's an ontology. You build the world that people agree on something, and that's what it is, and therefore that's what it is, right? So I want you to look into those things before we move forward. Okay. The Peters book, we're only going to start with chapter 1, but it is sort of a good comparative politics. So if you are a political scientist, I would suggest sort of getting through it. There are a couple of these things. Monk and Snyder are debating in 2007 the field. So obviously it's changed in 13 years. The newer articles, they haven't had time to be vetted. That's the other thing about science is it's slow, right? We won't really have any scientific analysis of the last 12 months for a few years, right? We won't really know how well our COVID response was until like 2022, 2023, because it took scientists time to go through the process, right? A peer review process to make sure the science is accurate, right? So there's a little delay there. Now, we do have an exam between the 12th and the 19th of February. That's really fast. It's coming up real fast. What I want to tell you about that exam is be prepared for this to come up right away. I've scheduled the exam sort of spaced out. The first block is what is comparative politics. So the questions I'm going to ask you are what can comparative politics do? What are its limits? What are its expectations? Be prepared for that. Now, I am definitely going to ask you a question about Scotch pull and Geddes, right? Just to be very, very clear, because I'm going to repeat this a few times, but we're going through this. When you look at week 4, Scotch pull and Geddes are famous. This debate they have is famous, more famous than any other debate that I know about in comparative politics. And Scotch pull makes an argument that if you have these certain conditions, these certain necessary conditions, what you come out with, right, in a sort of deterministic way, is revolution. If you have these things, these certain specific things that we'll talk about in the talk, that will lead to is revolution. And Barbara Geddes makes a counter argument and says, well, no, you picked cases in which those things were present and you had a revolution, right? It's not deterministic. And what really matters here is we're going to talk about determinism, which is deterministic, right? Which means it will happen, right? If you have certain necessary conditions, it will happen, right? If you take a pin and you push it off a table, it will fall. Gravity is deterministic, right? That's how gravity works, deterministic, right? What Geddes says is what you're really looking at is probability, right? High probability of those things occurring, not a guarantee that they will occur, right? A high probability. And so this, while Scotch pull and Geddes really make good arguments about everything in comparative politics, one of the things I want you to pull away from this as aspiring scientists in whatever field you are, right? Are we talking about things will happen, right? Will they follow, right? If you take in oxygen, you expel carbon dioxide, that's deterministic, right? That's the only way that the human body can function. Or are we talking probabilistic, right? You going to school so you could get a better paying job. That's probabilistic. Some of you will go to school and not get a job that pays significantly more, right? In fact, there are a lot of fields, including political science, in which the degrees don't increase your income dramatically, right? And so you could be worse off. It's probabilistic, right? So I want you to understand those aspects. I've kept you already longer than I wanted. You will probably see another video pop up if I can get the technology working today, and the syllabus quiz will be up today. Okay. At this time, are there any questions? Is there anything that people feel like I didn't cover? I'm going to give you a minute to sort of ask if there are any things that you want to discuss. Is there anything that you feel like you normally cover that was not covered today? Okay. My email address is kevin.worley@unov.edu. It is linked to my phone. If you have a question, if you want to talk, if you want to set up a meeting, any of those things are possible. Just email me. I am fairly responsive. I'm on a day schedule now. I worked a graveyard job for a long time. So right now I'm on a day schedule, but I might move to a graveyard schedule if that's what my work needs. If you have any questions, email me. I will respond as quickly as I can. I will answer you directly. I don't try to convince you in any way. I will just give you the best answer that I can. Okay. If there are no other questions, I'm going to let you go. You should see more stuff popping up through today. And then the classroom is really big. I know there's only 3 people here, but I think I've got like 150 seats. So there's enough room for anyone who wants to be here to come into class, and I'll add this to the announcements if that's what you want. Maintain your spacing, be careful, right? And then as we move forward, make sure that you're communicating with me about whatever your needs are, right? Because it's going to be a complicated transition. Unless something really goes off the rails, this should be the last semester that we're under these conditions. So let's just try and work under this as a special case and get through this, right? So whatever you need. Okay. There's nothing else. If there's no questions, feel free to go. Have a good day. I will talk to you at least by next Friday, but you'll probably be hearing more from me. If you do get the link, trust me, I have no interest in monetizing my YouTube channel, but if you want to subscribe, you'll get the videos sort of uploaded right away. I'll always post the link if that's what you want to do. If you don't like that I'm using YouTube, send me an email. This is just the easiest technology, but I am a Luddite. So if there's something there that you feel like could work better, let me know. Okay, have a good day.